Welcome to JLive. I'm Laura Mandel, JArts Executive Director, and it's great to be with you for JLive, our JArts virtual series of bite-sized conversations about Jewish life and art with the best artists with Boston connections. Today, I'm with theater maven and professor Stuart Hecht, who is a sir, an artist, a teacher. This man is hard to define because he's so wonderful and multi-talented. He's an associate professor of theater at BC. He's editor of the New England Theater Journal, a member of our very own JArts Theater Works group, a board member of the Alliance for Jewish Theater, who are co-sponsors of this conversation today, and so much more. So Stuart, we're lucky to have you. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And of course, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and we'll answer as many as time allows. So, Stuart, before we talk about you, I love how you and I were really enjoying intro music. Can you tell us what it was and why we played it?
Well, actually, I was hoping we could do that as a pop quiz at the end of the program and see if people would, or I could tell you. I guess I'll tell you. That's the opening to Leonard Bernstein's 1956 Broadway musical, Candide. And he wrote it exactly the same time, simultaneously while he was writing West Side Story, which I think is a hoot. Because as you can tell, that music's so bubbly and upbeat and classical, right? And on the other hand, and you think about something like, I don't know, Maria, and how different the two are, and yet he was brilliant. He could do that. But I love the show, and I had the opportunity to direct a bunch of years ago, and it's cheerful and upbeat, and it's by Leonard Bernstein. What could be bad?
I love it. What a perfect intro. Okay, so obviously you've given us a taste of this, that you were the ultimate theater, specifically Jewish theater. And I love that when I asked you to define yourself, you said that you've had this most unorthodox of careers with a number of the things I already mentioned and more. So tell us a little bit about who you are.
Oh, God. Oh, my gosh, that's impossible. How does one describe who one is? Well, how do we start professionally? Professionally, I started off when I was a kid. I was a musician in the sense I went to the piano and picked out melodies. My big sister would sit at the piano and make me sing songs with her. And the three of us with my other sister would sit in the back seat of the car singing. So, music, and I played the trumpet and I played the piano. And I got to high school and they had a really bad band. And my teacher had retired. My trumpet teacher, my best friend, went to a private school. I didn't know what to do with myself, and turned out they had a terrific theater department. So I got involved in theater doing that. And then I went to college, went to the University of Michigan, and I was going to be a lawyer because that's a respectable thing to do. But I ended up finding myself caught up with theater stuff and taking classes, double majoring, ended up going to grad school at Northwestern in theater. And while I was there, I started to get involved in the professional theater scene. My second year, and I became a member of the theater's artistic staff. I was 23, I think. And I did that at the same time as doing my coursework, got married to my delightful wife, Shira, who was at the University of Chicago at the time, wrote my dissertation, got another job working at Wisdom Bridge Theater with Bob Falls, did that for about 3.5 years, decided I wanted to teach. Even though I've been in the professional theater, I now had my PhD. And there weren't many jobs in the country, and I managed to get one for Boston at Boston College. And they said, we're hiring someone to build a theater department. Can you do that? I thought to myself, I don't know, but you're offering me a job, so sure. And that's what we did. We built that up. All those years, it was weird because when I was on the artistic side of things, I was always interested in the ideas side of things, the scholarship side. And I always was informing my artistic choices. And yet by the same token, when I would be working in scholarship, it was always informed by my practical knowledge and experience. And that was and remains pretty unusual. Yes, there's a lot of scholars out there who have artistic bent and talent, but I think what's unusual and even, dare I say, peculiar, is that I've managed to sort of walk this tightrope between the two, not because I deliberately did, it's just kind of the only way I could picture doing it.
Well, and to that end, I was going to say, Stuart, you mentioned last week that you said you feel like theater is really a secular religion for you.
Absolutely.
I think it's fascinating.
Well, I think that goes back to my grandmother, my mom's mom. And she was, she and my grandfather, they weren't married yet, but they lived in a little village, little shtetl in Belarus. And my grandmother, when she was young, was very devout. She's a very serious, bright, driven woman. And she was in Cater, even though she was a woman. I don't know how she managed that. And was very devout. And then apparently she told me this story many years ago that her father came back from America. First I had heard that he'd even been here. And he had shaved his beard off and was smoking a cigarette watching the sun go down for the start of Shabbos. And she was angry with him. What's happened to you? You're supposed to have a full beard and the passes and everything. But that's what he did. But she was very devout. And somehow in all that, then they came along, the socialists came along, and she became sort of into that instead. Instead, she substituted religion for sort of socialism. She became a member of the Bund. And she was, sneaking around. She was only a teenager, and she was throwing knives in the backyard. And I think it upset her family. They were worried about her. So they said, no, you're going to America now. So they shipped her off to America. And when she got to America, she sort of said, I'm going to be an American. She just had this quality, and she managed they ended up in Chicago, and they married. My grandparents married, and then they started a drugstore in Chicago. But the point is that they had nothing. I mean, the modest little building, they had their apartment in it, but one of the first things they purchased was a Steinway baby grand piano, because to them, arts and culture was everything. Arts and culture was everything. They made sure both my
so
mother
incredibly
and my
telling.
took music lessons. Oh yeah. All my cousins, Aunt apparently would go up to Ravinia, which is kind of like Tanglewood here, for in the summer to go to concerts. Where other people were sneaking into the baseball games, they were literally sneaking into Ravinia to hear concerts. So it was always very important. And they were still Jewish. There was no question about that. But they weren't devout of going to shul all the time. But the way in which they treated the arts was as being a certain kind of a sacred, I was going to say activity, but more than it was sacred, as you said. And I have always viewed it consequently, I think, as you rightfully said, as secular religion. I see the arts as secular religion. And it works beautifully with theater because there's a storytelling, and because playwrights, when they write great plays, of course, are challenging the times in which they live, and they're asking moral questions. Can we do better? How can we do better, right? And I think that a lot of Judaism, of course, is not so much about answering questions, but rather asking questions, hitting the ball to the audience, hitting it to the congregation, and saying, we don't know, here's the problem, here's the challenge, here's the dilemma we're in. How might we move forward? How might we improve the world? And I've always found that in theater as well. I also think that, it's interesting to see how the Jewish stuff bubbles up in one's own life. I never thought about it consciously. But like, even when I worked at Goodman and stuff, they said, oh, Stuart, your ability to do close readings, in other words, text analysis. They said the best I'm bragging, but they said the best we have ever seen. And I didn't think, but that's Talmudic. And that comes from my father. My father was born in, he was born in Cleveland and raised there. My grandfather was a self-made man who ended up in real estate. And from that, he ended up starting a black and tan nightclub in Cleveland in 1930 or something, 30 or 31, because of the Depression. And it ended up being the biggest. Black and tan means you have black performers for white audiences some night, black audiences other nights, kind of like the Cotton Club in New York was. Mm-hmm. Apparently it was called the Cedar Gardens. Apparently it was the biggest such club between New York and Chicago. Wow. And my dad grew up in that business, but my grandfather did well. And then he sent his own son, his one son, my father, first of all, my father was the only Jewish kid growing up in the school system. Went to Shaker Heights High School. Everybody else was Protestant, and he was Jewish. And then he got into the University of Michigan. He was one of 2 Jews because there were quotas. And Michigan was very anti-Semitic. But he was one of 2 Jews accepted to his law school class. So I think that's another side of it. And I laugh about it too, and I joked about it with you before, of course, also because my mother loved classical music because of growing up in that family, with learning all that stuff. And if you just hum a few bars, you could just go sing entire symphonies or sonatas or whatever. But my father loved Black music, and both gospel and jazz from the 1930s and 40s from the nightclub. So I joke it was a mixed marriage, but we were raised in that, and I loved it, and I still do. And I'm not a snob. I really think that in terms of the arts, there's no such thing. I mean, there's bad art, which means that what's bad art? Bad art is not interesting. It's not challenging. I think art is about making the inanimate animate. It's making words into actions in life and breathe. You see a painting, it's not just a bunch of lines. You look at it and you blink of a great painting, you go, oh my God, it's breathing somehow, it's moving. How is that possible? But I think that that's what it is. And it's not, and so it's not that jazz is good or bad, or that rock is good or bad, or anything else is. They all have merit and they all have something to say. So
and I think there's no question that eclectic background had quite an impact on you with the array of interests you have and things you've accomplished, in these past many years. But tell me something a little bit more about some of your Jewish involvement now, because clearly, professionally speaking, in addition to, books about Jewish theater and generally being this incredible maven of theater, tell me a little bit more about some of the Jewish work you've done with JArts, with the Alliance for Jewish Theater.
Sure. Well, I'll just go back one step and say this, first of all.
Yeah.
When I was an undergrad, I double majored. When I went to grad school at Northwestern, I triple majored. And I think people were looking at me like, I never thought about it. Nobody challenged me about it. I was taking classes in theater, and I was taking classes in English, and I was taking classes in sociology, urban studies, but to me, it was just that explained everything. The conventional disciplines didn't address these issues fully properly, and neither does larger context. And again, I think that's a Jewish point of view. I really do. So that's part of, I think, the answer. And I ended up what I wrote about. My dissertation, which is now going to be a book, was about Hull House, which was an social settlement in Chicago designed to help immigrants adjust to American life. And one of the tools they used was theater right now. So, this has always been there. The other story is I was at BC, and I'm helping build a theater department and directing and teaching and all that jazz. And it's thrilling, exciting, and challenging. And I was busy, but I didn't think about, I was busy doing that instead of my own scholarship, really. And the quick story is we belonged to that time to Temple Israel Natick. My wife, Shira, was on the board, and there was a big event, and I didn't know that many people. She knew everybody, of course. I'm sitting at a table by myself, and along comes this gentleman. He sits at the table with me. He's introduced himself as Cantor Scher. I said, how do you do? Nice to meet you. How do you do? He started asking me questions, found I was in theater, and he said, well, can you do a program for us in theater? I said, sure, happy to. Well, Stuart, can you do musical theater? Oh, yeah, because my background was in music and theater. Yeah, I could do that. He said, well, Stuart, this is a synagogue. It should probably be Jewish. Can you do that? I said, no problem. So he and I put together a program. Well, I did. I put together a program. He sung in it. And it was a 2-day program. I staged something like 40 different songs to be performed in 2 days. And it was thrilling, but it opened up the whole world to me. I never thought about it that way. I never turned to my own identity or traditions that way. To me, there were sort of separate worlds. I was compartmentalized. Why don't you actually bring them together? So I started working on that. And that became my first book, which is called Transposing Broadway, Jews, Assimilation, and the American Musical. Every major composer made on Broadway history, except for Cole Porter, was Jewish. And so it became I wrote a book trying to prove that wasn't right, that it was about assimilation and adjusting. It turned out, no, that is the case. So it was very thrilling. It did very well for itself. So that's part of the story. But that opened up whole new worlds, because then people said, Stuart, can you write on this can you be on this panel about Jewish issues, the portrayal of Jews in America? How about Jewish theater? How about musicals? How about Jewish musicals? And I suddenly became, it was funny because it was all stuff I pretty much knew already, didn't realize I knew it. Thank God for my mother-in-law, she taught me. But I'm just saying, it just, one thing led to the next. I was contacted by people in, forgive me, a journal in Israel. Can you write an article for us? Well, I had written something on Zero Mostel, the delightful and wonderful and infuriating Zero Mostel, and sent it off to them, and they published it. The funny part was they translated it into German, which I can't read, but that's okay. You know, but if this started happened, and I also thought about stuff about this, the situation of America, all immigrants in America in general, and then Jews in particular. And that just kept itself out. And so because of that, and I knew about the Alliance for Jewish Theater because David Check, who was at that time the person running it, wonderful scholar and an artist and advocate for Jewish causes and culture and arts. But I knew him. But anyway, but then they were going to have a conference here in Boston. Stuart, can you be on the keynote panel for that? Oh, sure. You know, but every time I turned around, the same themes came up about community, about asking questions, you know, about belonging. And it struck me, oh, I thought those were my issues. No, no, no. Those are the traditions that I come from. Those are my values. And I didn't understand that for years. And now I do. And I embrace, I've served nationally on all sorts of different organizations, not Jewish, in terms of, you know, but in the past few years, I've been able and blessed to be able to start to stretch my wings in those areas. And to my way of thinking, to give back. So with that in mind, yes, the Alliance of Jewish Theater. And then as my wife heard through Facebook that Becky Price, now Becky Price Smith, was going to be directing a show, and she was looking for somebody to play a 60-year-old Jewish guy. And she didn't know about me at all. She didn't know I was a director, let alone act. Shira told her that. And the next thing I know, saw this play, it's called Bar Mitzvah Boy, which was produced by this organization, J Arts, I think it's called. Which is
I've heard of them once.
I know, and have been active in it ever since. And Annette Miller, and I put together a script that she and I did around town a little bit about Neil Simon. And then Barbara Grossman, working with Didi Commissar, and and we did the stage reading for God of Vengeance, which was a remarkable experience too, which corresponded to Indecent, which is the Broadway Tonio winner that was then being done at the Huntington, which was thrilling to be a part of again. And then more recently, Bintel Brief. So you can sort of see, and I think the funny part about it, you know, we sit around our meetings and everything. I seem to be who's saying, well, what about Bintel Brief? What about the Helm stories? And it's really funny because I wasn't raised with that stuff, but I learned it over time because it became more and more important to explaining who I was and where I came from, and made the world make sense. So it's been quite a blessing, and I'm very grateful to the Jewish Arts Collaborative, not just for whatever it's done for me, but it's doing for it and what it means nationally and internationally. Because these organizations are so precarious and so fragile, and there's always change. There's change in personnel, there's change in generations, there's change in values, there's change in which people wanted to do business. And that which made sense 20 or 30, like synagogues, you know, which made sense as stable institutions back in the 40s and 50s and before that, you know, suddenly we see Havara and Minyan and things like that instead, and people want to do their own, you know, and you go, what's going to happen to these organizations? And well, maybe it's Darwinian, maybe it's just that's just the way it is, and they're doomed to not die, but morph into a new form that will be better equipped to deal with the changes that we face in the years and decades and, well, hopefully centuries to come. So I think it's so important. And I think the thing that troubles me the most when I look at the state of the Jewish world with people my own generation, but younger, is not for a lack of good heart and not for a lack of good intentions, but an ignorance, a fundamental unawareness of what is in Judaism itself. And I'm not being preachy, and I'm not talking about you have to go to shul every week. I mean, if you want to, go for it. I'm just saying, before you look elsewhere, why don't you look at your own doorstep? and see what's there, you might be surprised. And if you go someplace, and I did that too. I mean, I looked at the outside world before I came back, and I'm not a zealot by any means. I'm just simply saying, this is where the world makes sense to me, you know?
Well, and I think, Stuart, this is why we're so lucky to have you in the Theater Works group, because you bring such a diversity of experiences. And I think we are creating a new way to engage with Jewish life. So, you know, I'm so appreciative to have you on board for this endeavor.
Well, you know, I'll tell you something. We did the Bintel brief, when was it, last fall? And I don't know how many people actually got a chance to see it. I certainly recommend it. If only because it's a great show. I mean, the whole thing's what, 25 minutes for the show. It's the film itself, and then another 35 minutes of really interesting discussion about it. But you know, but to sit with everybody and talk about and go through all these old stories, these letters from whatever, you know, 100 years ago, and saying, yes, this is what immigrants were going through back then. These were the issues and problems they were having. How did people here who were Jewish try their best to guide and give perspective and respect and these things? And so the chance to do it again and go through this and perform it now is to bring it back to life, not as an antique, not as a relic. You know, Dory Robinson and Ariella Hunt. I mean, these two took the interviews or the films that we did, pieced it together into a marvelous program. And the thing I loved most about it was the very last one, where there was a very contemporary looking young woman who was probably 24, 25, with nose rings and tats, thank you very much, you know, who was asking the same questions and saying, how might I live my life? And what kind of guidance can you give me? Not to tell me what to do, but to give me perspective. And I thought, that's the point. It's not that this stuff, and that's Jewish. It's like the Seder. It's not that we have to go and be in the sand in the desert to understand. Again, from the arts, it's about empathy and imagination, by putting yourself in that situation of those people long ago, not as an escape, although of course that's what it was, sorry, Exodus, you know, not as an escapism, but rather to say, hey, these things never change, sadly. But they're the fabric of life. And again, that's what theater is, of course. A great play is something that's set in a different time and place, and yet speaks to us. Very quick thing, if I may. And I tell my students this, I say, you know, it's like, oh, you want to learn about ancient Greece, and you can take an anthropology class or history, what have you. And, you know, and they look at the ancient pottery. Oh, and there's little drawings of women who are doing works, you know, from 2,500 years ago, you know, doing chores around the kitchen or whatever, that's what it was, you know. Or you can look at it, let's put on its feet. Let's get two people up on their feet with the text in their hand as actors to do a scene from Antigone. Now you're Antigone and you're Haman. Now read out loud. And it's English, right? And yet what happens is, as an audience member, you're going, oh my God, those two people are clearly identifiable, and they're in a relationship in terms that I can understand. And not only can understand, this happened with me with my girlfriend last week. In other words, it's not something that's precious and crumbly in your fingers. The beauty of theater is we bring it to life. We bring 2,500 years ago from a different country to different language and different values to life in front of our eyes, breathing. And that is like the Torah. That is like hearing stories of all those flawed people. Judaism is not about ideal people. Judaism is about flawed people. Who wants to see a play where everybody's smiling and happy and that's it? It's boring. Any more than news. Okay, can you imagine the 10 o'clock news? Everybody's getting along fine. Bye. No, that's the point, that we're human and we're dealing with our flaws and our issues and our problems. And this is the ongoing state of the human condition. So yes, I love theater, and I love that I'm Jewish, and though sometimes, of course, it drives me nuts. And I also love the fact that there are other artists in other media, whether it's music or painting or poetry, Jews for haikus, right? You know, and who are also working in their medium to explore really the same issues and questions, and to come up with answers that are rooted in who we are and where we came from millennia ago, and yet endlessly flexible and adaptable. to the constantly and ever-changing world in which we find ourselves. And the stuff that I learned when I was 20, some of it's still true, some of it isn't. And how do you be open-minded, folks? How do you not become ossified? You can go to shul and hear hear that parsha, and you can also go to a play or read that book or that poem and say, oh, I need to maybe think about this in a fresh way to keep alive and active and to make sure, not just that I'm engaged, but that I understand the world, because the world is ever changing and I will make good choices. So it's about
Stuart, it's no wonder that you have been an incredible voice of theater and Jewish theater on some PBS documentaries and the like, because you really speak about this so beautifully. So I just want to say we are at time, but I don't want to let us go without you telling us about your new book. So please give us the snapshot of your book that's coming out.
Oh, you were the nicest person. Thank you so much, Laura. Well, as I said, the first book was 10 years ago, Transposing Broadway. I think we have, there's links being put on here, so you can look them up if you want to, and they're on sale from Amazon, by the way. There on my screen is that's actually Irving Berlin at the piano, and it was a piano that transposed the key. So he can only play in the key of F, all the black notes. So he had a piano where he could change it. So I thought that's kind of like what Jews do. They come to America, they're not changing the melody, they're just changing the key, hence transposing. That's that book. On the right is the book that's coming out this month. I just found out yesterday it's being mailed to me, which is how fresh it is. It's called Makeshift Chicago Stages, A Century of Theater Performance. It's co-authored by my two young friends, Megan Geigner and Jasmine Mahmood. And it's a fascinating experience to work with two people who are very different from me and each other. And we're sort of saying that Chicago, because Chicago is a theater mecca. If in Boston, there's about 20 theaters, professional theaters. In Chicago, just at the start of the pandemic, so I'm not sure right now exactly, but at the start of the pandemic, there were 300 operating theaters. It's the most, as well as all these theaters that, Steppenwolf and the Goodman and so on, that are bringing actors to television and film and all sorts of media. But our point is that in Chicago, why is it so vibrant? And the point is that because they never had actual theaters, but homegrown stuff was always done in unconventional spaces, whether it's a storefront or it's the church or it's a bowling alley or what have you. And it's still true to this day. And it makes for a certain kind of theater and a certain energy. And it's very much about issues and ideas and grittiness. And so it's a thrilling book, because it starts with the World's Fair of 1893, which is a big spectacle. 27 million people attended it. It was all lit by Mr. Edison's new light bulbs, up to about 4 years ago. And I think it's a fascinating, lively, interesting book for anybody. I'm very proud of it and excited about it as a scholar. But it doesn't have Jewish content per se, so people should be aware of that. But it is exciting. And then again, I'm working on taking my dissertation about Jane Addams Hull House and how she used theater and making it into a book, which I'm about 20,000 words more than my editor wants me to be right now. So hopefully we'll see how this goes. But hopefully it'll be out, I hope, by the end of next year or something. But so please, it's going to be, right now my working title is Bridging Difference. Jane Addams Hull House Theater. So it's very much, again, about different people colliding into each other and how the problems with that, but also how they learned and grew from each other and how they had helped all these different groups, including a lot of very prominent and not prominent Jewish people find their way into America successfully. So it's really thrilling. And it's fun to think that that's been a common thread all these years. Oh, and then this is my journal. My journal, I shouldn't call it mine. I'm the editor-in-chief, but it's New England Theater Journal. That's last year's issue. So that's the plug. That's the Stuart Hecht plug.
Absolutely. And Stuart, for everyone out there, we'll send out some links after, because you've referenced so many great things, your books, some of the PBS specials, upcoming events for theater works, etc. So we will send those all out in an email after. But
I have to make
Stuart,
one quick correction.
Yeah.
No, you just posted, it's not Bridge. That's my new book. the book you just posted is called Makeshift Chicago Stages. Been published for another year. It's called Bridging Difference. So thank you. I'm sorry. I'll be good.
That's great. Stuart, this has been a delight. You have many, many friends and fans out there right now. So we'll have to do another conversation another day. But this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your leadership, arts, for this conversation, for everything you do. Thank you.
My honor. Thank you.
And for everyone out there, please know that JArts relies on donations from generous people like you. So if you like what you've seen today, please consider making a gift to make more conversations like this possible. And of course, please track the work that Stuart is doing with our Theater Works group. We are currently working on a project around film stories, as Stuart mentioned, that will be coming out in the fall. So stay tuned. It should be really excellent. So thank you so much, Stuart, and we'll see y'all soon.
Thank you all.